I'm thrilled to be talking to Jess Search, who's somebody I've probably known for about 20 years. I guess that means we met in preschool. She really is a true legend in the documentary space. I think most of you in the room will hopefully know a bit about Jess already. She's chief executive now of Doc Society. She's branded in Doc Society merch. That's how much she cares. She started out at Catalyst TV. She co-founded Shooting People. Raise your hand if you're a member of Shooting People. If you're not, go sign up. It's brilliant. I was just saying, I once found a flatmate on there, and more people do things more relevant to filmmaking on there as well. She was then a commissioning editor at Channel 4. She co-founded Britdoc, which has now become Doc Society. And Doc Society has worked with films including Virunga, Citizen 4, Look of Silence, Knock Down the House, and they have Andrea Arnold's Cow screening here during LFF and had some projects in the works in progress at LFF. Jess is also an excellent moderator, so this is like the time I had to interview Oprah. You know, the tables have turned. But we're so thrilled. Jess usually is promoting other people and lifting up other filmmakers. So to get to hear you talk about some of your own work, I think is going to be a real treat. Thank you to Julie and Storm and team for letting us have this opportunity. Jess, can we start with a little bit of your sort of early history in this space? I mean, did you know you wanted to work in film? Did you know you wanted to work in nonfiction? And where was the first break?
First of all, I mean, you're absolutely right. I'm much more comfortable interviewing, which I love doing, than being interviewed. But I brought you a little gift.
Is it going to match?
It might be.
Match something you were...
Did anyone come to the drinks party that we had? We were giving out these scarves on Thursday. They are designed by Doc Society alum Luke Moody. They are limited edition. They say Documentary United on them.
Allow me to get dressed properly.
You don't have to wear it now.
Well, it actually sort of matches. There's a little bit of pink here.
There's something going on. But yeah, no, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a young person. In fact, I was mentoring some young state school kids for the Women's Festival just like 2 days ago. And yeah, and that was kind of the number one thing I wanted to say to them, which is, you know, because everyone asks that of kids all the time, don't they? I had no idea what I wanted to do until I left university, so I didn't really have a sense of the world that I was heading into. My primary thing was I knew I was gender non-conforming, and at that time, leaving university at the kind of, you know, the very beginning of the 90s, I knew that I couldn't work anywhere that had any kind of formal or informal dress code. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it was like a huge determinant for me in terms of career. I just thought, well, I can't be a management consultant or a lawyer. I can't do any of these things because I'll have to turn up every day wearing clothes that I don't want to wear. So I was like, I think I better go into the media, because that seemed like a space where it was kind of like less formal.
You could wear trainers to work. Yeah, still do. I mean, I still do.
You can wear jeans to work, which you could even in the 90s, which was an enormous relief to me.
Yeah. And your uncle helped get you a first job, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, total lack of direction. In fact, my career began extremely nepotistically, and you know, at a time when we were really thinking about equity and inclusion, because my uncle and aunt actually owned a TV company. My uncle owned a TV company called Catalyst Television. And so leaving university without a clue what to do, I went off and hung out on the gay scene in Sydney for a year and then kind of had to come home and do something. And he said, why don't you be my personal assistant? So I was like, okay. So I went to work at a TV company. But my uncle, Tony Lai, was probably the most successful black man of his generation at the BBC. So my very first job in this industry was actually for a black-owned and managed, production company, which at the time I didn't appreciate how rare and unusual, that was. But yeah, he was my first boss in the business.
And were they doing nonfiction programming? Yeah.
Yeah, they were doing, it was a funny mix. They were doing Gardener's World because my aunt was a gardening presenter. My aunt's name is Jess Search and she was presenter on Gardener's World. If your dad likes gardening, he won't know who my aunt was. And my uncle was making, films about black achievement in sport and those kinds of things for the BBC. And so the company kind of had people working on both. So it's kind of quite a different crew of people who were working on the one set of programming, kind of on the other. And I used to, as you can imagine, hang out in the edit suites with the guys that were making the Black Achievement in Sport series.
That's pretty mixed. I like that. Can you garden? Do you have an achievement in sports?
I'm a huge disappointment, exactly, to my aunt.
On that side. but a success in other sides. So you went to Channel 4. Can you tell us a little bit about that era at Channel 4? Maybe what were some of the kinds of programming you were working on? And then why'd you leave? Because we think Channel 4 sounds like a dream job.
Yeah, and Channel 4 changed my life as a young person. I sort of alluded to, growing up kind of queer and gender non-conforming in the suburbs, and Channel 4 really changed my life. What I saw on that channel when I was, I think I was about sort of 14 when it launched, and it, was just such a big thing for me. So obviously to work there was, I never thought I wanted to work for big companies. But to work at Channel 4 was kind of a dream. Actually, of course, it was less good than I thought it was going to be when I got there, like a lot of dream jobs, because I had a lot to learn about the kind of corporate nature of large organisations, which is an important set of learnings, even if you're not going to stay in those kinds of companies. But I sort of had I feel like I had the last hurrah. And in fact, I think Sandra's here, Sandra Whipham, who we worked together at Channel 4, because we were the last people running independent film and video, along with Maxine Franklin, who's also Doc Society, as is Sandra. So the kind of independent film and video team from Channel 4 sort of left and became, Britdoc. And we left because the channel, closed it down. And it was very symbolic. I mean, people cried about the closing of independent film and video. And I don't just mean us, because it was our jobs. Because independent film video had been, in some senses, the remit of Channel 4 distilled, or the most remity bit of Channel 4. And we were the last bit of Channel 4 that didn't have to worry about ratings, and we were judged by, the quality of what we were doing, experimentation, new voices, kind of big statements, making impact. And our stuff was always in the annual report that went off to, prove how Channel 4 was doing Channel 4's job, and it was all kind of our stuff was always at the front. But that didn't make it any easier to get any of that stuff commissioned all year. It just meant you were held up as a great example of what Channel 4 should be doing, but you still had the smallest budget and couldn't get anything made the rest of the year. Am I right, Sandra? Yes, she nods. So we sort of had the last hurrah there, really, of making amazing work that wasn't driven by ratings, and then that ended, and we were told they were going to close the department, and we'd have to transfer into the main documentaries department. And in fact, Kevin Ligo said to me the immortal words, "We need clever people like you to stay here and find the next wife swap."
Oh dear. I mean, what kinds of stories were some of the things you were actually working on during those years? I mean, what kind of people were being showcased, and what kind of filming voices?
I think the thing that we were maybe proud of was we had this thing, we had the box. And the box was this cardboard box, and it was just full of all the random shit that people sent in, because Channel 4 still was open to just people being like, I've got something to say, I want to make a film and I want it to be on Channel 4, and I'm just going to write to Channel 4 and kind of tell them about it. Obviously now you wouldn't get, they just send you away and say, go and find a production company, and the production companies will send you away because, you can't make them any money. But so this box was just full of like amazing, crazy stuff that people just sent into us. And we used to let it build up, and then we would basically kind of take a day and just watch the box. And the stuff that was in the box, right, Sandra? I mean, like the box. We got the first ever stuff made by the guys that now make Six Education. They sent in a thing which they'd made, which was kind of kooky and crazy, and we were like, let's do it. And it kind of went on. We had a film from a guy who had sex with a Russian hooker and made a film about it. It was just like all this stuff in the box. We showed that. We lost the Ofcom on that one. But that sense of kind of, that anything might happen and anything might be in there, and you might hear from anyone around the world with something to kind of to say. I mean, so we did lots of more mainstream things than that. But in a way, I was thinking about it on the way here, the box somehow was the thing that Channel 4 really lost when it lost independent film and video, that real surprise. And that someone anywhere in the country might, from their bedroom, I mean, Lee Kern's first film was in there, could actually talk to a national broadcaster and say, I've got something to say.
Those were different times. I'm glad you didn't go into wife swap. For many reasons.
I know, I'd have been so bad at it. That's also what I said to Kevin, is like, the irony is I'd be really shit at it, so, because if you don't love a thing, if it doesn't move you, I don't think you can even do it well, so, yeah.
So then came this idea with you and Sandra and Maxine, and was there another partner?
And Beadie Finzi, who's the other founder who wasn't, but she wasn't working at, she was a filmmaker that we worked with. She used to send things into that box.
And you set up something called Britdoc. What was the original idea and vision And what did you start out doing as the core of Britdoc?
Yeah, the core definitely has not changed. And the core was this idea that actually, where is the space for independent documentary? And if it's not going to be on Channel 4 anymore, and to this day, Channel 4 don't show any feature docs. There's still some space on Storyville. But actually, we were like, wait, if the only way to make documentaries in this country is that, a TV station is going to kind of corral it into the format that they now prefer. I mean, you could just see the narrowing, even then 15 years ago, the narrowing of interest in subject matter and form in documentary. And we were like, wait, this is sort of going to kill documentary in this country. We've got to figure out where's the space for people to make the film that they want to make in the way that they want to make it. And how do we make that possible? Where's the financing going to come for that? How are those films going to get made and seen? And actually, they need a champion. They need, because filmmakers are too busy making their individual film, as they should be. Who's going to actually think about the space that they operate in and kind of try and push, and make some kind of open water for them. Yeah. And we were like, there should be an organisation that champions independent documentary in this country. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of get. And actually, we're at those times again. I think now. We were,
which we will talk about.
Which we'll come on to.
Yes,
the space is disappearing once again, my friends, and we need to get together to kind of.
I mean, one thing I love that it wasn't. I mean, first of all, there were some brilliant, fun festivals called Britdoc, and gosh, they changed my life, I think. But one thing I like that it wasn't just about production funding, even in those early days, and you've done a lot of work around impact, and if you've not read these case studies and the impact toolkit and things. Can you talk a little bit about the impact work that Doc Society, or then Britdoc, then Doc Society has done, and what you've learned from that?
Totally. But I just wanted to pick up just quickly before I do. When you said about the festival, actually, I think that's an important point. When we left Channel 4, Peter Dale, who was our wonderful, wonderful boss at Channel 4, who was a big part of the reason that that our organisation got started. By the way, and we got started with a huge cash injection from Channel 4, so we got a very nice leaving present from them, which birthed the organisation, and Peter was a lot to do with that. But at our leaving party, within the channel, and everyone came because they were really sad that independent film video was going. And then Peter said, well, they're going to start this new organisation. And this seems to me to be an organisation founded on the principle that everything starts with a great party. And when he said it, when I was standing there in the room, I thought, oh, is he kind of...
offering to pay for a party? No,
I just thought, I couldn't tell if it was slightly... sort of slightly backhanded, is he taking the piss right now or knocking me down us a little bit? Like, do you know what I mean? Not to get too big for our boots. But actually, with every year that's gone past, I realised, like, of course, he knew us, so how wise he was. Because actually, we're trying to build a movement. We're trying to build a scene. You're trying to, for independent filmmaking, for independent doc making to thrive, it's not about individual people making relationships with funders and making films. That's the transactional television capitalist, kind of model. It's actually about groups of people, scenes of people coming together and creating possibility, and sharing and working together and building something bigger than their individual efforts. It's about movement building. I don't think I'd ever heard the word field building when I was at Channel 4, but it's totally field building. And so parties are actually completely at the centre of it. Great festivals, great gatherings, great convenings, places where people come together and exchange ideas, and feel good and kind of can put down for a second, the burden of doing this work, but actually kind of, just kick back with each other and remember what it is that we're all trying to build and achieve together. So yes, good
those
parties,
were important
good festivals
to me, and I miss them.
Yeah,
can you bring it back?
We can bring them back, but we certainly have always tried to hold fantastic parties, and we had including the scarf party. Yeah, yes. The parties will definitely keep rolling. And then in terms of impact, I mean, it just seemed to us that most of the independent doc makers were doing this work because they wanted their work to make a difference. I mean, that's a very trite kind of sentence, isn't it? Make a difference. But in some way or another, people are committing to do this work and they're earning less than their market. They're earning less than they could do if they went to work on Wife Swap. Yes. And they're for a reason, because they think that their work will make a difference, and that's either a difference to individual viewers, that there is an audience for this film. There is a set of people for whom this could be transformational in the way that things that I saw on Channel 4 changed my life, in the suburbs, in the 80s. or in a more kind of macro way, that there is actually like, a government policy that needs to change. That actually you can't take away the £20 universal credit from people. There might be something much more kind of like definitive. But people make this work because they want it to be influential. So rather than leaving that to, it seemed to us that most filmmakers left that to chance, but hoped for it. And then there was a group of filmmakers who were actually pretty strategic and smart about that, but didn't really. But that these filmmakers didn't know about that. Do you know what I mean? Didn't know that these other people had actually sort of figured out some pretty good stuff. So we just sort of thought, actually, our role, as ever, is to sit in the middle, of a kind of hub and spoke out to all the filmmakers, field building, and kind of go, actually, if we collected together all the wisdom of all the filmmakers who've done really cool, amazing shit with their films quite deliberately, and then shared that with all the filmmakers who were thinking that they might like to do that, then we could basically pour rocket fuel, on the ability of doc filmmakers, to supercharge their projects, which is in fact exactly what's happened. And the guide that you alluded to, I'm really proud to say, is in 4 or 5 languages now. And that's not because we were like, oh, we should push this on people who speak Mandarin, but it's because, in our global community, our Chinese filmmaking, partners were like, we have to have this, and we're going to translate it. And actually, can we start doing workshops with, with Mandarin-speaking filmmakers? And we're like, hell yeah! And it's in Arabic because our Arabic partners were like, and they've come in and they've changed parts of it to make it more specific to their political context. But interestingly, the impetus and the approach and the basic thinking behind it, which is not something that we would ever have assumed, having made it from a Western, kind of Anglo-American point of view, they're just like, hell yes, all the frameworks completely make sense. We just need more case studies of Arab world films, and so we just put more case studies in. Yeah, and it's also in Spanish and Portuguese, and I can't remember what else, possibly French, I can't remember, but yes.
Did any of this work sort of reaffirm to you why you keep doing what you do, and the impact that documentary filmmaking can actually have on society?
Yeah, I mean, that was our conviction when we were at Channel 4, which was that, broadcasters weren't really interested in the impact of films because it doesn't serve their, doesn't serve their needs. If you work inside a system like a broadcaster, you get rewarded primarily on the overnight ratings. And then secondarily, on press, if it's favourable to the channel. If it goes down well with politicians, then, you get some points for that. And if you win some awards at the end of the year, you get some points for that. But it's basically kind of ratings, and then there's other things, kind of falling off in terms of what you'll get props for. But what about long-term change to the ecosystem? Well, that just doesn't, it's just not on there.
Also, how do you measure that?
It's just not on there.
Yeah.
But it's not even like measuring. It's just literally not on that. In fact, when we started the organisation, it was at the time of Super Size Me, which obviously everyone could understand was a documentary that had impact. So we often use that as an example to say, well, how there's that film. And we used to say then, which is still true now, that if Channel 4 had commissioned Super Size Me, it would have been a 1-hour documentary that had gone out at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. It would have got pretty good rating. It would have got all the previews of the day, pretty good ratings, loads of reviews. Everyone would have loved it, and then would have disappeared. Would have made fuck all difference to McDonald's. but everyone would have gone, wasn't it great? But it wouldn't actually have, stuck and kind of delivered. So TV just doesn't, it's not structured to think that way. It's not structured to think about how you might work with a film in a multi-year way, in a multi-region or, regional context to kind of push for a change in perspective or framework or language or ultimately policy, but, in a way that's about really committed work. And Sandy Dubowski, who's a really good friend of mine, made a film called Trembling Before God about queer Hasidic Jews. And he was one of those early filmmakers who kind of really nailed it. And so it was really about finding people like him and saying, tell everyone what you just did. But he spent like 7 years making that film and then 7 years working with the film. And he toured that film, to every kind of major city where there was a large, Jewish community around the world. Taking Steve, the gay rabbi, on tour with him, organising debates in cinemas between the gay community and the Jewish community wherever he went, and he changed thousands of people's lives profoundly, and switched lots of conservative rabbis, on the issue. And he was doing that work 10 years ago, so it was really just about saying, how do we just make it accessible to people to understand how you would go about thinking about that.
And where would something like Good Pitch, where did that idea come from? Because it seems very obvious now.
It's like a party.
But it wasn't. It was a
It's
party.
like the Impact thing, and then it's like a party because it's like really great, and it's like a show, and it's like really high energy, and you get everyone together, and everyone feels great, and then you all work together, and then everyone networks, and then everyone leaves, and everyone's work has been amplified.
And for people who don't know,
has anyone been to a good pitch here?
Has anybody done a good pitch?
Did you put your hand up? Yes. Okay. Well, am I lying? No.
Is it like a party?
It's like a party, yeah.
And this is filmmakers get on stage and tell people about their projects, and then the audience is not necessarily funders, but it could be partners, people to amplify those stories. It could be NGOs. And how has Good Pitch grown? I mean, it's many different good pitches now, aren't there?
Yeah, and that's really how we have this international partner network, because we first did the event here in the UK, thinking about it in our context. And again, we didn't assume that as a format or an approach it would work for other people's contexts. But, then our kind of partners abroad, I think it was first South Africa, there was one in Johannesburg on exactly the same model, worked equally well, and then in India and Indonesia and China, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, I'm missing loads because there's been kind of so many. And again, I think what's been exciting about seeing the Good Pitch work spread is this sense of, like, when we started, we wanted to create a community of independent doc makers in this country and kind of go, we have to know each other, we have to band together, we have to, establish our common goals and perspectives. And then actually seeing this work globalizing kind of has been amazing, because it turns out that an organization like Doc Society was starting in so many countries around the world at almost the same time. Like, there was this kind of wave of, I think, understanding that documentary had so much to offer and hadn't really been explored, and independent documentary was really important, and how would those particular artists be championed. That impulse was happening to people literally in Beijing, where Cinex started almost at the same time that we did. And then a few years later, in East Africa for DocuBox, and Indocs in Indonesia, and the Independent Documentary Foundation of India. So it's kind of like, hell, we actually have we have full-on siblings, in all of these places with all the same kind of goals. And then actually being able to share tools and approaches between each other and sort of say, hey, we've developed this kind of nifty event called kind of Good Pitch, and people seem to kind of like it, and it brings everyone to the room, and then saying, great, we'll try that. And then them taking it, and then them riffing it, and then saying, oh, we've riffed it, we've done this to it. And then we're like, hell, that works even better. And then saying to the Indonesians, do you realise that the Australians just put a 1-minute disco in the middle of the event? They're like, no, that couldn't work here. Maybe it could. So
did you say 1-minute disco?
Yeah. It's
okay.
A 1-minute disco is a core part of almost every Doc Society event and convening. If you've been to a Good Pitch, you've probably been involved in a 1-minute disco. You have, yeah. 60 seconds, on your feet, let's dance together.
Amazing.
A room that dances together stays together.
Okay, maybe later. Hearing you talk about some of this concerns with the broadcasters then and now and what their priorities are makes me also think about the streamers and their influence right now on the nonfiction world. Some for good, getting lots more people to watch nonfiction work.
Yep.
Some for bad, and maybe how many more docuseries do we need about cults, for instance? From where you sit, I mean, what are some of the issues that concern you about this independent documentary space? Does it still feel independent? What are the pressures there that worry you?
No, 100%. I feel like, since the time that we left Channel 4 and started this organisation the last 15 years, the whole, there was a period where the streamers were coming through, Netflix obviously in particular, but now joined by others, when suddenly there was a lot more distribution possibility for independently made work. And we've really benefited from that. Like a lot of our films go on the BBC and on other public service broadcasters around the world, and have been on lots of other kinds of platforms and done the kind of cinema and then online route. So we've had every single permutation of backer across all of the work, because it's hundreds of films. But obviously, lots of the work also went to Netflix, and that was extraordinary that there was this new home for independent documentary work. So I feel like it was part of that kind of amazing sweep of the space opening up. But obviously, Netflix now is not what Netflix was then. They don't need to acquire in the same way, because they want to commission. They want to make the work and to actually
And own the IP.
well, they always, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
they've always wanted that, I guess. Yeah.
Although they want that much more aggressively now, I agree, because they used to take kind of a 10-year, like at the beginning, and now they want to own. And so in a way, we're back into the same sort of dynamic that we left Channel 4 for, which was actually, well, hang on though, we want the filmmaker to make the film that the filmmaker believes in, not the film that the corporate gatekeeper, I mean, Channel 4 is a public service broadcaster, but still, that the gatekeeper is kind of saying, well, we kind of would rather it was a bit more this or a bit more that, because, actually scheduling is saying they've got a bit much of that. We were trying to get completely away from that dynamic, and obviously that dynamic is sort of coming back around now, because once you get someone who can commission everything, then they start to kind of actually dictate what it is they want. Plus, I don't think the form, you can really feel like what a Netflix documentary is now, in the way that you used to know what like an HBO drama felt like. So, it's sort of that narrowing of kind of form, and also the political narrowing, because the truth is that, when Netflix was an American-only company, it came out of a lot of its early subscribers were kind of reasonably educated, progressive, and they wanted to know what was going on in India and Brazil, and to kind of watch documentaries, about human rights and to kind of discover those kinds of things. Well, it's a lot more complicated, as life got for Google, right? Once you're in all of those countries and you've got offices in those countries and you need to keep, government relationships, with censors in all of those countries. And suddenly it's a different dynamic. And that's not anything about a moral failing of any individual that works there. That's just I have an MBA, I'm interested in business. That's just the kind of reality, of that kind of setup. So we're in a really different place now. And I really worry that the independent space, is closing again. On the one hand, we've always been resource poor, and that's a problem because that really prevents a lot of people from entering the space. And I know that we're going to come on and talk about those kind of issues of fairness and justice and inclusion. So, but the resource curse of, documentaries never really making very much money, if any at all, or, that struggle to wash their face, also meant that lots of people in the independent documentary space were there for common reasons, of conviction. And that's suddenly now, if you can turn that idea into an 8-parter for Netflix, but only if you sell it and come under an LA studio who do all of Netflix's work. It's just a completely different ball game. And suddenly one which can make people a bunch of money. I had CAA, wanting to have a meeting with me right before COVID in London. And it was just that weird thing of like, oh, hello. Those kinds of people never took any interest in us because there was never anything.
Now there's 10% of something now to be had.
Now there's 10% of something that might be able to be spun into another thing or packaged with another thing or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, wow, our world is changing. And, but we don't want to be poor. I'm not saying that, independent filmmakers should wear a hair shirt and, you should be like a miserablest, poor filmmaker to show your true credentials. And we've always, talked about sustainability with filmmakers, maybe working in a mixed economy. So you make some work here and some work there. So maybe you make some corporate work, then you have your independent work. And that's how you're going to balance the books. So it's not to say that people shouldn't go and work on, big series for Amazon or Apple or Netflix, but are they going to be able to then work on their own independent work? Is there going to be any space for it? Because ultimately, if it doesn't get you can always get it, if it can be shown, you can get it funded because there are other funders in the ecosystem that fund things that they think are important that will get seen. But if ultimately they kind of close down what will be seen, then we might be entering another kind of closing. Well, I think we are entering another kind of like narrowing. And then it's beholden, I think, on the independent doc makers to come together and articulate their space and why it matters and what they need, and to kind of call on partners. The irony, of course, is that, at the same time, BBC and Channel 4 are under attack as well. So we've got, 2 institutions who have often, shown a lot of our work in the past. Channel 4, less so. Channel 4 slightly broke my heart because I felt like it, took the easy road and didn't really try to perform its remit. But now the government wants to sell it and we'll have even less, possibility of other sites of work being shown. So, yeah, I would love Channel 4 to kind of step back into the space and to kind of understand that they walked away from something like incredibly important society and democracy, reclaim it, and see off being privatised. And I really hope the BBC can see off some of the ideological right, in the Charter renewal can maintain. But, I think we should be entirely realistic, guys. We could be waking up in 5 years to a completely transformed media ecosystem in this country. I mean, in other countries too. But if just thinking about the UK, with a diminished BBC, no Channel 4, with streamers that, have to, entirely driven by bottom line, don't have even a public service remit to let you down on because they don't even have it, and with offices in the countries of all the major kind of autocrats of the world. So I think we should have our eyes wide open and be, strategic together about how we defend this space.
And this is not just in the UK, obviously.
No,
PSBs and other organizations are under threat. What can we do? What can the people in this room do? What can this independent documentary world do to fight back against some of those pressures, to protect the independent voice? Maybe this is a whole other masterclass, but what are some ideas for how that can be protected?
Well, I can't say that I have the answers. Some of the things that we're doing at Doc Society is, we are involved in public service broadcaster kind of campaigning work. We talked to our board at the last board meeting and said, is it mission creep for us to get involved in defending public service broadcasters, in the UK? Because actually our job is, working with independent filmmakers. But actually, is it core to our mission? Because actually, if we don't look further down the road, then actually, do you know what I mean? It's going to be much harder for us to perform our mission without those entities still existing. So we had a really robust debate about that. And they agreed that it was something that we probably, should bring under the mission. So we are, in this country, involved in, conversations and various groups thinking about the future of the BBC and Channel 4. And I would urge everyone else to do the same. And then beyond that, I think there's work to be done as a community, which we're right at the very beginning of coming together and being able to articulate really clearly why independent documentary matters. Because I feel like the people inside this world, we understand it like religion. Like you don't even need to kind of articulate it. You just know that actually having people who are able to make work which is completely uncompromising, without fear or favor, that isn't corporately driven, which comes from a place of conviction and kind of and passion and creativity, that actually we need multiple of those voices, and that's actually an incredibly important part of what society and culture and democracy is. I think we just really get that. But I'm not sure that other people outside our sphere of work, do you know what I mean, really understand it. And I think they don't understand it not because they aren't interested or because they don't care, but because actually we haven't articulated it in the way that people need to, do you know what I mean, hear it and kind of understand it. People in this audience, imagine you're here because you work in independent documentary, or you'd like to, or you have at some point. It's like, actually, would your sibling be able to articulate why independent documentary matters? And if not, then, we need to kind of be reaching out, do you know what I mean, to those close and further away from us and saying, this is what we do, this is why it matters. And then I think as a community, we can start figuring out how it is we advocate. Because I think, I think people would and will understand and want to. I don't think anyone wants to crush out. I don't think there's anyone who's deliberately trying to crush out the independent documentary space. Do you know what I mean? It's just one of those things where it will happen because all the plates move, all the kind of like, do you know what I mean? All the things will move around. Oh, look, their space got crushed out. And that's because we won't have robustly explained it and defended it. Does that make sense? And said to people, this is what we need from you. We need the BBC to do this. We need Channel 4 to do that. We need the BFI to do this. We need Netflix to do this. We need Amazon to do this, because that's what we need. The ICA to do this. We need the Tate to do this, because this is what it's going to take. We need the Guardian to do this, because this is what it's going to take to protect this really valuable cultural and democratic, space of storytelling.
So it's almost like an impact campaign for the whole of the documentary.
For what we do.
Yes.
And maybe we could start with a party.
Oh, or a 1-minute disco leading to a manifesto.
I think so.
One thing I know that's very important to you is equity, inclusion. We're hearing a lot of talk about this, and I think some of the talk is well-intentioned and good that we're at least talking, but I think you well know we also need action. So can I ask you, what is Doc Society doing as action on this?
Yeah, totally. And it's such a multifaceted question, this. And, yeah, it's like a.
We could do a whole spotlight on this.
We could do a whole,
yeah,
but I thank you, because I'm really excited to kind of to sort of talk to this, because it's all encompassing. Actually, it's not just who's making what. I mean, at the most obvious end, it's like, well, who's making the work or who gets to make the work. And actually, since the murder of George Floyd, we realised that we weren't breaking down. We'd done that thing which a lot of people in this country had done, which is, you receive the kind of BAME category, and so that's what you report on, or that's what you're asked to report on, and therefore that's what you do report on. And I sort of kicked myself that as an organisation we hadn't already broken down those numbers, because as we know, actually, you actually want to understand, well, how many black filmmakers are we filming, not how many BAME filmmakers are we filmmaking, so we can actually look independently at those groups, or indeed how many Muslim filmmakers are we working with, or how many Asian filmmakers are we working with, because the BAME thing is this kind of soup. So actually we hadn't broken down those numbers, so we did break down those numbers. And that meant that we could see it, and then we could kind of say, okay, we can report that back now to the community. That's where we are today, and then we can kind of goal set on that. And so that, I think, it was really important. But it's not just about, of course, if it was just about who gets resource or gets to make films, then we're not learning the justice lesson that's being offered to us, because it's also about what kinds of films are people being allowed to make, which comes down to gatekeepers and their prejudices, and indeed who are the gatekeepers, who are the people who are making the decisions about who gets the resources as filmmakers. And it's been really beautiful seeing, I think particularly out of the US, black filmmakers saying, well, it's great to have more opportunity to make work, but we're also asked to make work about social issue or about the social issues of our community, and actually want to make films about black joy, thank you. But no one's interested in those. They want films around oppression in the community, because that, again, is something that a white audience is interested in, and actually black audiences are interested in seeing different aspects of the community reflected. Films like Hell County this evening, which I'm really proud to say that we were involved in. So so it sort of starts to unravel lots of other things, and then actually what is stopping people from being able to come and make the films that they want to make, other than that they won't be handed the money. And that's all kinds of other detritus that you realise needs to be kind of cleared away. So we're really keen to persuade the funders that we work with, and obviously we work with the BFI, but we work with lots of other funders as well, funding different kinds of work, to really think differently about how we're funding work. Like, why aren't we funding films, and why aren't we funding people? Because actually, the precarious nature of filmmaking, if you come from a family that doesn't have wealth security, then actually, entering into the precariat of independent filmmaking is really tough. And actually, why aren't we first paying for people and then paying for projects on top of it? Why aren't we? And we've been playing with ideas about universal. We call it FBI, filmmaker basic income. But yeah, can't we be moving to a kind of more model like that, which takes away stress, from people to go and be creative and spend a year or two trying to raise the money for their film because they get paid first, these kinds of things.
This is revolutionary, though.
Yeah, because as we know from the work that Dr. Steve Presence has done, on studying independent documentary work in this country, filmmakers get paid last. Well, that's not. That's clearly an issue. So we have to change the way that films get funded. And then I think is also a huge benefit to the challenge that's coming, which is also about really facing what extractive filmmaking practices, are still going on. And I love the independent space, the indie doc space, because we are the most, ethical end of a spectrum of kind of documentary work being made. And the kinds of moral debates that do get aired and called and questioned, in our community, not to say that our community, has figured it all out, because we absolutely haven't, but we are in those conversations because it is a very morally driven field, and I love that about it. But, a lot of what we've picked up and we perpetuate is stuff that comes from old models of filmmaking, from our historical past, and also come from TV, which is one of the most exploitative, industries imaginable, in this very kind of unquestioned replication of things around, even like the relationship between subject and or even the word subject, and director and power and all this kind of stuff. And actually, at whose cost did you make this film, or whose back did you ride on, to make this work? I think all those conversations, it's like, it's great that they're here. Like, let's have them. And filmmaking is going to emerge from this so much stronger and more equitable.
And how will the organization itself try to change, try to evolve, hire more inclusive
Totally.
staff?
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, absolutely put my hand up and say that, on the day that, that George Floyd was being murdered, we're a 100% white leadership team. We are the same 4 white women who've been in this work, forever, who kind of gave up our jobs back in the day. You heard the story, still trucking along, still kind of, still doing it. And, it's not that we keep leaving and replacing ourselves with others. It's just that we just haven't left, and so we're still hanging around. So we have a super diverse board. 50% we actually have 3 boards because of the way their organisation is structured with different entities. But anyway, across all of those board members, and it's quite a lot of board members, we must have at least 20 or more board members. We have 50% board members of colour. We have some real badass leading human rights lawyers of colour in the US, on those boards, and here's some leading kind of, thinkers around equality and civil rights. So we have amazing board members to hold us accountable and keep us honest. But we looked at our team and we were like, well, but it's still us, and actually, how do we face that, or how do we break that? And actually,
how do you do this without quitting? Like, you can't just quit your job,
yeah,
can you?
we had that. Obviously, we had to have that conversation, which is like, should some of us quit? Should we give away our reserves to another organisation? We also had, I think quite rightly, that conversation, which is it the most important thing that leading, independent figures in our field of colour should come and solve our whiteness problem, or actually they probably want to run their own organisations? So is it right that we actually ask the most talented people out there to come and join us, because maybe that's actually holding up their journey to starting their own thing? And then we reflected on, how did we get to start our own thing? And it's like, because we were already at Channel 4 and we managed to do an exit deal out of Channel 4. Okay, so in fact, we wouldn't have Doc Society, if we hadn't been able to leverage something which is very difficult to get. And so it's been a kind of an important year of kind of like trying to break that up. So we considered all options, and we took all options to our board. And in the end, what we've decided to do is lean into the fact that we're a leaderful organisation. So there's been, 4 of us, 4 editorial leads on the organisation, BD Finzi, Sandra Whipham, who's here, Maxine Franklin, and myself. And we were like, actually, we're really good at working kind of like together in quite a female, power-shary way. Maybe we can just extend that out and become more like a legal firm structure. So, because we're not really a pyramid anyway, and don't kind of aspire to be so. Maybe we can be flatter. So maybe we could have 3 more directors join us to make our director bench kind of more diverse. And then we had to figure out how would we make decisions amongst 7 people, which meant that we spent the last 6 months really kind of interrogating. It's been such a fascinating process, because you have to kind of figure out, how does the organisation work now, actually, in order to change it into an organisation that can work even better. And then if you've worked somewhere for a long time, stuff is not really made explicit. So you don't really know. You kind of, how do we decide that? And you have to kind of sit there and think, well, I guess I would send an email and this would happen, and I guess I would probably wait for all 3 of them to say yes. And okay, so that's something we decide by consensus. So we've been kind of doing that work to get ready to basically kind of share the leadership bench. And we'll be announcing shortly the first of those 3, and then we're on our journey. We're changing, Wendy.
Great, I like it. Keep it fresh, and to decide all that over Zoom, I presume, is even more impressive. To think about these things during a time of societal change, for better or worse, too.
Yeah. Well, in some ways it's been good, because it's like all this thinking about the these internal questions about, what's the right way to proceed as an organisation, and also how do we meet the challenges of our field right now. These are not your day-to-day work. So actually, in some senses, the way the world's been the last couple of years has been helpful, because all the time that I haven't been going to events,
to parties.
To
real parties.
I haven't actually been going to parties, or holding parties, or going to film festivals. It's time.
You can reflect.
Yeah, it's time to, because this is kind of these are the kind of bigger gears of things. But this thing about things not being explicit, obviously, was a big charge from people of colour around the lack of progression in white dominant organisations, white led organisations, sort of saying, you don't understand how much is coded, and it's therefore really difficult for someone who feels outside of those codes to navigate and succeed within. And I found that was one of those kind of light bulb things in the last, and I was like, I can't imagine that, so I'm missing something. And then beginning to understand some of the white dominant behavior in organizations, the need to always fix everything quickly or have the right answer. And that's been really, really interesting and kind of really profound. And then it led to me thinking this thing about the independence movement, which is, wait, if we, about the realization about how much goes on non-explicitly, and what that means, and then actually realizing I think maybe our entire field goes on non-explicitly, like we can't even articulate why independent documentary matters, because it's just again a part of this assumed, well, we know, you know, right?
Yeah,
I know, you know,
we get
yeah,
it.
well, we haven't talked about that.
Wow, I've been hogging your time, but I would love to hear from the audience if anybody has any questions.
Some of the European public service broadcasters have realised that partly how they get miss out on things to Netflix is they can't move as quickly, because obviously Netflix can say this much money, all rights deal, and it's the money that the filmmaker kind of needs. Whereas they'll go to, you know, Arte, who'll say, well, we're in, you know, for our €50,000, and maybe the Dutch will come in as well, and then maybe after the Dutch you can get some Belgian money. But then it's like, okay, I've got to piece all these bits together to get to what is already on the table from Netflix. And so they've done this a few times already, but I know that the incoming new Storyville editor, Philippa, is going to be building on that work, which is that they want to basically collaborate and coordinate much, much better, so that they can much more quickly say to filmmakers, okay, there's 6 of us and we're all in, it's this much, you know, all together. So I think, you know, that's also kind of a really encouraging development. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great time to be in this field. I don't want to give the impression that it's not a great time. I actually think that the equity inclusion debates, as I say, they're actually opening up even, because it's, in the end they're bringing the justice debate. Do you know what I mean? So actually it's not, yeah, and so actually it's all good, right? It's all good. It's all really exciting. It's all really challenging. It's all brilliant. And there is more. I don't think it's necessarily true that there isn't as much funding. I mean, and I don't just mean because Netflix are pouring money in, because actually the world has woken up to how powerful independent documentary is. It's also why, you know, Modi and Bolsonaro going after it, you know, it's a dangerous time to do this work too, because people can see how impactful it is. But because people can see that, there is more and more funding for this work coming from third-party places. I mean, when we started 15 years ago, our goal was to persuade other people to fund documentary, because if you took the money from Channel 4, BBC, they told you what to do. Like, we've got to find money from other people. And so we would go around foundations in the UK and present to them. And they would literally just were baffled. And they'd say, why would we pay for a documentary when we have BBC and Channel 4 in this country? Like, literally, why would we do that? And you had to say, well, have you noticed how the things that you care about aren't on TV anymore? Well, that's because they're not paying for them. So you've got to pay for them, and then we'll make them and they'll be brilliant. And then shut down. And then, oh, okay, maybe. And now, like 15 years later, that, you know, and we're not the only people who were pushing that message, but like the money is really, like, we've got a new climate fund. Climate's a really important area for us. You know, huge slabs of storytelling money from people like IKEA and SIF, who've never funded documentary before. We work with the Oak Foundation, who haven't funded documentary before. I mean, so it's a super exciting time. Welcome, new filmmaker, to the space. It's brilliant. You're here at just the right time. Everything's to win. Everything's to fight for. Come on in. Come to the party. Have a scarf. Yeah, and to be clear, you know, most filmmakers are not in a situation where Netflix are dying to give them like a ton of cash, because as Wendy alluded, they're picking off, you know, certain, you know, oh, is it about sex, death, Nazis, sharks and cults? You know, over here, you know.
Exotic animals, you forgot. Yes.
Yeah, it's like, I was like, oh yeah, we've got animals. Is it a music by someone that, you know, I've heard of? You know, so most of the filmmakers that we're working with, you know, are often not working quite in that space anyway. So it's not really that they'll give you the choice is to take the Netflix deal but lose control of your rights, you know, or to not take the Netflix deal, but because it'll end up being a different project. And that's how it always was with Channel 4 back in the day. People would come and say, I really want to make this film. And you say, well, you can make it for TV, but it won't come out the other end of the system looking like the thing that you thought it was going to be on the way in, and you won't have the right, do you mean, to make any of those calls. So you have effectively lost control kind of your project, but actually there are instances where people say, actually, I think it's more important that it's on Netflix because of the kind of reach that it can have. And by the way, some of our films have had extraordinary reach on there and would not have been able to achieve their impact goals without that kind of reach. So sometimes reach is more important than other things, and so you would factor kind of that into it. So yeah, I mean, it's not that often going to be such a bias. It's more going to be, do I make my independent film that I've been trying to, do I continue making my independent film I've been making for 10 years, but I lost hope a million times I'll ever get to finish, or do I just go and work on, because I'm being rung up now all the time, do I just go and work on a 10-part thing about, something that I wouldn't necessarily watch. But it's a great job and it's well paid. And my mum will be really impressed because she'll say, everyone saw the thing that you worked on, and actually, should I just go do that? You know what I mean? That's more, I think, what it kind of comes, which reminds me more about what the choice was back in the day, which was, am I going to try to do my independent thing, or do I just go and work for a production company making something, do you know what I mean, that they want to make, that the commissioner wants to buy, and sit in the edit suite and take the notes and make the changes. Absolutely, yes. And when we did, we created a couple of years ago the first sort of safety and security protocols for people who work in independent documentary, because they existed for people who are working in journalism, but working for a newsroom and working as an independent documentary filmmaker are completely different. And nothing had been written specifically for the indie doc experience, which is often very immersive, many years, you get really close to subjects, it's really complicated, you put your whole kind of self into it. And so we kind of created that, and a part of that assessment of protocol is around self-care, around mental health, because no, it's a real thing. Now, many filmmakers have ended up, with PTSD and various things, and weren't really talking about it. And then I feel like a couple of years ago, people began to kind of like break cover and become a bit more honest, and people began to talk about it on panels like this and sort of say, actually, I had PTSD after I made that film, or actually I was incredible, I went through like an incredible depression, or actually, and then other filmmakers were like, oh, really, me too. And then suddenly it was like, oh, here it is, all the emotional cost of the work that hasn't really been kind of talked about. I'm trying to remember the name of, there's someone really fantastic in our field who's doing this work. Maybe Sandra.
Rebecca Day?
Thank you, Rebecca Day.
Film in Mind. She's a therapist and a documentary filmmaker. So she gets it all around. And I think she's trying to raise money to do a toolkit.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to write about mental health in these industries. And I would mention to anybody in this room, if you are struggling, there's a film and TV charity in the UK. Yeah. It's the only one in the world that has a 24-hour helpline. And if you're feeling you just want to talk or want to find out resources, you can call them. They can, if it's an emergency, they can get you on the phone immediately with somebody for free. And literally, I've looked, this is the only place in the world that is doing that. But please.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think, independent doc makers have a very special kind of, relationship to the material. It's really, really immersive. And the sense of responsibility to subjects, is really huge. So, even just on kind of, will my film get finished? I'm not sure I can finish it. I can't raise the money. Actually, I am letting down this community because I was going to tell them. I mean, it's such a different relationship with the material, do you know what I mean, than people in fiction or people in news who are like, oh, I didn't get to file that story and I feel kind of bad about it. It's like you spent 3 years with these, with this community, and actually you can't manifest their work, or you can't manifest their story, or you do, but and that thing of like, will it or won't it get into the festival suddenly is like, and then of course, our protagonists in films, and also the mental health burden on them. And I feel like, again, the way that the extractive TV system works just sort of doesn't like acknowledging all of this. But there are, the beginning, I think, of new, sort of progress. It was interesting that it was Prash Naik, was the head of legal at Channel 4 for 25 years and is now our general counsel. He did some really interesting work actually with Vice, putting together a mental health care package for a subject of a film before it went out, including kind of therapy and support for the trolling that person was going to get for being in a film. So I feel like, yes, these conversations kind of like are now, and the structures are kind of beginning to kind of change around them. But yeah, it's super important that it's acknowledged.
This is my moderator's version of a 1-minute disco. It's like a 3-minute rapid fire fun. Who would you want to direct the documentary of the Jess Search story?
What?
Can you name one filmmaker?
Well, anyone who works in documentary knows they'd never allow a documentary about them to be made, so
Okay.
that would not happen.
Okay.
I would sue proactively to make sure that film. No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
No,
No, not happening.
no.
Do you have an all-time favorite documentary? I know this is Sophie's choice.
You literally can't. Yeah, it literally is Sophie's choice.
But what
I mean,
today?
it's
It
awful.
depends on the day, doesn't
You
it?
can't. I mean, you say Sophie's choice casually. Sophie's choice. She's asked to choose between her children, and then you say, modelling on that, which is your favourite film? They're all my favourite film.
Yeah.
Every single one that we've ever been involved in.
You moderate a lot of pitches, as do I. Can you remember either the best or the worst pitch? You don't have to name names.
I think, well, just as a rule of thumb, the more established the filmmaker, normally the worse they, or the bigger the cheese, the worse the pitch.
Because they don't think they have to prepare.
They don't prepare. Yeah, and then they say, "I'll be fine. I do this all the time," and then they bomb.
So never take it for granted.
Yeah, always the way. I think one of the most memorable pitches was a good pitch in New York. Well, Jennifer Bray, who did a film called Unrest about her struggle with ME. It's an absolutely brilliant film. I completely recommend it to you. But during the pitch training, she was so unwell with the condition that her film was about. But she directed it lying in bed, so people would go and the crews would film for her remotely, and she would be she'd be lying down, looking on an iPad and directing the thing, and from her bed. So she was that unwell. But so she would come to pitch training, and her husband would carry her physically to the toilet. It was just heartbreaking. Anyway, on the day, she absolutely kind of smashed this incredible pitch. So beautiful, so composed, and absolutely so amazing. But because we couldn't have any extra sound in the room because of her condition, just clapping, nightmare. And so we had to prep the whole room that whilst she was in the room, there could be no clapping. And so there was the hand, the thing with hands, instead, so the silent clapping. And it was just, I think it was just the most extraordinary moment because she pitched so incredibly, and then this whole room silently kind of loving her. Oh.
You're in this business to change the world, but also you love films. Can you tell us just a film or two or three this year that everybody should see? I imagine Cow would be one.
Should see Cow.
But on platforms or just coming to cinemas, or not that you have to be involved with it. What have you loved?
What have I? I'm trying to think of things I have not been involved in because it seems really self-serving. Or can I say things I've been involved in?
Yes.
The truth is that I watch an awful lot of things that we're involved in because we're involved in a lot of work. So is that bad? What do people feel? Is it self-serving?
Say anything.
Okay. Super interested in journalism at the moment and the future of journalism and its relationship to documentary. Writing with Fire, that was at Sundance last year by Rintu Thomas, which is about some lower-class Dalit women who start their own newspaper in India. And it's about them transferring it, as all newspapers have been through a transition to being a digital newsroom. And it's absolutely extraordinary. And these women turn up with their iPhones to the local police chief and start berating him about why he's not convicted someone of rape and why the police officers aren't doing anything, and these completely bemused Indian officials being held to account by these women who are filming them. And then it's really amazing. Writing with Fire. It's a film coming out later this year. Look out for it, called Fuck This Job, written by a Russian filmmaker, Vera, who's based in London now, about the kind of rise and fall of the only kind of independent independent TV channel in Russia called Dosh TV. It was kind of the Channel 4 of Russia, and it kind of came up under Putin and has been crushed under Putin. 2 weeks ago, they were named foreign agents, but it's told from the inside, and it's actually really funny. And we've got another Indian film coming out because actually, talking of Global South, these amazing films coming out of Global South filmmakers. A filmmaker called Vinay, who made An Insignificant Man, which was the first ever documentary in cinemas in India, and his next film is coming out, not yet titled, about an Indian newsroom. It's super amazing. And Collective, not one of ours. Have people seen Collective, the Romanian film? If you haven't seen that yet, it's really, really extraordinary piece of filmmaking by a Romanian German director about corruption. But he follows an investigative journalist.
Wonderful.
I themed them.
Yes, thank you for theming them. Next, we'll do exotic animal training No, just kidding. Jess, final word to the documentary community who's gathered here today. What words of wisdom? Keep doing it. Come to the party.
I think the words of wisdom are probably for you to give me. Can you give me your words of wisdom on the way outside? Because I'd love to hear kind of your reflections, particularly about the stuff about how we come together as an independent doc community to kind of talk about what we do. I'd love to hear what you think about that. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Julie, Storm, the whole team. Where can people buy a scarf? DocSociety.org. Can you buy one online?
No. We give them. We give them out. Give them out for free to people because you know. So come to a party and get a scarf. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, everybody.